I'm really excited today because I'm going to be sharing with you one of the most astonishingly varied dishes that I know of anywhere. If you go down to Louisiana, you'll find it at every restaurant, it's in every home. But it's varied as to how people cook it, the techniques, and the ingredients that they use. Welcome to All Things Food, I'm John Woods. And I love to cook, but I cook to love, and today we are talking chicken and sausage gumbo. I've seen a lot of people cook gumbo. I have friends that are really great gumbo cookers. And I think there are several elements that go into making a good gumbo. Most people will say that there are 3 elements, and that's kind of universally accepted. But as I've started to study this and to cook gumbo time and time again, I really think that there are about 9 essential building blocks or elements that go into a really good gumbo. And I'm going to share those with you today. The first foundational building block, I call this the alpha and the omega of cooking gumbo. You must have a good roux. It's not a blonde roux, it's not a brown roux, but you really need a good dark roux. And it's amazing how roux, actually, when you talk about roux, it scares people to death. But it is really fundamental for this good gumbo that we're going to build today, because it adds flavor, it adds texture, it adds viscosity, it adds a real depth to the gumbo that I don't think anything else can possibly do. Now, this isn't a video about making roux. I'll do that in another video, a more detailed video. So I'm going to give you some of the basics that I think you need to know in order to get started on your journey into making really great gumbo. Now, the first thing you need to do is have a good skillet, a good heavy bottom skillet to make your gumbo. I have a cast iron. This is a wonderful cast iron. It's well seasoned, or you could use an enamel cast iron. But whatever you use, make certain that it's a heavy bottom and a heavy construction, because it's going to be under intense heat for a long, long period of time. You don't want to use anything that will scratch, and this enamel coated cast iron will scratch if you use a metal spoon or whisk in it. There are really 2 ingredients, simple ingredients, that make a roux. Nothing else goes into a roux. You have your fat and you have your flour. And this is where I think people get really confused, because they think fat and flour, and they go to the store and they see all these fats and flours on the shelf of the store there, and they don't really know which one to get, and they get the wrong one. So regarding fat, a couple things to keep in mind. Get a fat that's high, that has a high smoke point. That means it'll stand up to a high temperature, probably something at least 400 degrees plus. And I think the universal fat that people use, and I think the safest one, is vegetable oil right here. And that's what we're going to use today. And don't get a fat that will transfer flavors into the gumbo, flavors that you don't want. If you don't like duck, don't use duck fat. Don't use bacon fat. Use a good neutral fat for your gumbo. And then there's flour. And here's another confusing thing, because there are dozens and dozens and dozens of flours, and you can use all flour to make a roux, but not all flour makes a very good roux. And for the purpose of our video today, and again, this isn't a video about roux, we're going to use an all-purpose flour here. This is actually a self-rising flour that I like to use, and we're going to use that in our roux. Now, I'm heating up my skillet. I'm going to go ahead and pour my oil in there and get it started. One thing you got to really do is monitor your heat. You don't want to get it too hot. You don't want to get it too low. So the more you make roux, the more you'll understand this principle of controlling your heat. So we're going to let that get warm, and then we're going to slowly add our flour into the roux. And here's what we need to keep in mind. We have to give it our undivided attention. You don't have time to answer the phone. You don't have time to go answer the door. You don't have time to play on the computer. Keep people away from you, because it could be very dangerous. And we want to give this our total focus as we do this. We're going to be here for a few minutes. And so once this gets warm, we're going to stir, gradually sift our flour into this and keep it stirred. And we're going to build us a great roux. There we go. So I'm going to put a little bit in at a time. What about the measurements? They say it's equal parts of flour to fat. Well, that's true, and it's not true. If you have 1 cup of flour and 1 cup of fat, They may be equal in volume, but it's not necessarily equal in weight. And in my opinion, and I think a lot of people would agree with me on this and some would disagree, is it's better, you make a better, more consistent roux if your roux is equal parts by weight and not volume. It's already beginning to thicken up a little bit and it looks very good. I'm going to turn my heat down just a tad. Remember, the higher the heat, the faster you can cook your roux, but you run more of a risk of burning your roux. So if you're not experienced at making roux, you may want to turn your heat down a little lower than you will once you get the hang of it. Once it gets a little thicker, I'm going to change over, get rid of the whisk, and I'm going to use a flat bottom wooden spoon. Helps me move it around a lot better. And we're going to just cook this for a while, maybe about 15 minutes or so. I'm going to keep it stirred. Now, I don't have to stir it vigorously. I just try to keep it moving on the bottom. And remember, the more you stir it, it's going to take a little longer to cook it. So let's just move this around the bottom here, keeping it up off the sides. And we're going to make us a nice dark roux. So I'm staying right with it. We've been cooking this about 4 or 5 minutes right now. It's getting darker. It's kind of a creamy color, brownish creamy color. It's going to pass into a brown roux and then eventually get to a real nice, dark, rich, aromatic roux. And it smells really nutty right now. If I'm making gumbo, I'll usually make my roux a day or two ahead of time, or I'll have some that I've already made stored in the refrigerator or freezer. And that way it cuts my cooking time down considerably. And once you make the roux, actually you've done the hardest part. The rest of it's quite easy. And you can't really mess things up too much after you make the roux. So there we have it. It's been about, maybe 15, 18 minutes or so, and our roux is very dark and rich looking. Really that nutty aroma that we're looking for. And let me tell you a little secret. First of all, I forgot to tell you, but always leave a mitt on your skillet because you don't want to reach on there and grab a hot skillet. So always leave that mitt there. I'm going to pull this over here. Let me turn my heat off. And even though I pulled this off the stove, there's a lot of residual heat in this skillet. And I'm going to keep stirring this for another 3 or 4 minutes until it cools down a little bit. And while I'm doing that, let's go ahead and talk about something else. You'll notice these 2 bowls here. This is roux that I made up earlier. I think I made that maybe yesterday. And I like to do it ahead of time and have it ready and have all that I need ready in case I need more to thicken my gumbo. It's always available and I don't have to stop and make more roux. Sometimes if you get a little bit of oil on top of it, if you will just let it set up overnight, you can drain off some of that oil, and that way you won't get that oil film on top of your gumbo as much as some people seem to do quite often. Some techniques will tell you to take your Trinity, your peppers and your onions and celery, and go ahead and put it into here, and that's a good method. I've done it many, many times. It pulls out the natural sweetness in the vegetables. I choose not to do that anymore because I think I can control my gumbo and the thickness of it and everything a little better by just making my gumbo my roux ahead of time and then adding it later. We're using several kinds of sausage today. I think I have 3 different kinds here. And what I like to do is cut it into a manageable piece and then cut it right down the middle. And then we're going to quarter it. The reason I like to cut them into the smaller pieces, I think it's just a little easier to eat. Now, some people like to cut it into rounds like that. Not my preference, but again, you do whatever you're comfortable with. And we're just going to cut these into nice, comfortable bite-sized pieces. Here we have our chicken, and I love using chicken thighs. I prefer that much over breast, and we do have chicken cooking over here. And we could use that in our gumbo, but I like to use the chicken thighs. So I'm going to clean those up a little bit, trim some of the fat off of them. And I'll tell you something that's really important. Sometimes you'll find a stray bone, a fragment of a bone in these breasts. Always feel it top and bottom and make certain that there's nothing in there, any bone, so just to be safe. Then I cut it down lengthwise and I turn it and cut it into smaller pieces, bite-sized pieces. See, there's an example. There's a bone right there. In fact, it feels like several bones in there. The reason I like using chicken thighs, they don't seem to get as stringy as breast, and they're not as tough. I think there's just a lot more flavor. And I'm going to season this chicken really good. This is my homemade seasoning. And we want to season that chicken really well. A couple tablespoons full. That's going to be nice and good in our gumbo. And we won't have to put a lot of seasoning in our gumbo after doing this, actually. So what we're going to do is we're going to clean up. We don't want to contaminate anything. Set our chicken aside over here for use in a minute. And we're going to clean up everything and we'll come back and start cooking. Man, we're through the hardest part, making the roux. And again, we established the fact that you have to have a really good roux to make a good gumbo. And we're going to talk about roux again in just a moment. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to add just a small, very small amount of oil to this pot here, to this Dutch oven. Not very much, just enough to get it coated on the bottom. And then I'm going to go ahead and pour my sausage in here, and I'm going to render out the fat in the sausage. And what I'm doing by this method is I'm building flavor. This is going to caramelize. It'll get that Maillard reaction, and it'll build flavor into the sausage and really help our gumbo to be all that we want it to be. Always like to listen for the sizzle. There we go. We'll go ahead and pour that in there. Keep that stirred up a little bit. Once it browns and caramelizes, I don't think we're going to have a lot of oil render off of this, and I'm not going to worry about it too much. The sausage is browning up really nicely, and I tell you, we're really building some flavor here. There's enough oil or fat in the bottom of this so I can go ahead and saute my onions. Go ahead and throw those in. Stir them up a bit. Throw in my celery. Try to get it into the pot. Yeah. There's the celery. This is part of our Trinity. And then the Holy Trinity is somewhere around here. The garlic. I almost forgot that. Can't forget our garlic. We'll save that until the last. We don't want it to burn. And then we're going to throw in our green bell peppers. And we get a little browning on the bottom of this, so I'm going to deglaze this a little bit. Take some of that chicken broth out of there. Put it to use. Deglaze the bottom of that pan. Again, that's building flavor into our dish. And we're not going to cook this Trinity very long. Just enough to get a little soft. And I put my chicken in last. And why do I do that? That was asked to me by one of the camera girls a minute ago. Why do I do that last? I don't want to overcook it. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put my broth in here in just a few moments. And then I'm going to add the chicken, the seasoned chicken last. And then we're going to put it on the simmer because it's going to be on the stove for about 2 hours. If you overcook chicken breast, they become very stringy and tough. And that's one reason I like to use the little chicken thighs, because they're a little more forgiving than the chicken breast. And I think they have a whole lot more flavor. We're going to go ahead and add our stock over here. Now let's talk about stock for just a minute. Let me get back here and grab a few things. This is homemade today. This is the real deal. I have a chicken in there because I'm going to make a rich chicken casserole right after this video, and I can hardly wait to do that today. But if you don't want to make your own chicken broth, buy some at Walmart. I mean, make certain you get the non-salted chicken. Or I tell you what I like to use in a pinch, and that's this Better Than bouillon. This stuff is great. I don't cook without it. I have it here all the time. Has a great flavor. Remember, it has salt in it, so you need to be careful about adjusting your salt when you're cooking. But those are a couple pretty good options right there. I can't tell you which is the best one to use on this, but I do know this is really, really good. So we're going to start with about 8 cups in there. And I think that's all we need. This is our new kitchen, by the way. All Things Food Kitchen here at Spitfire Acres in South Haven, Mississippi. Wonderful place. So I hope you're enjoying the video. If you've learned anything today, go ahead and hit the like button. Subscribe to the channel. Tell all your friends. And every week I try to bring you practical recipes that are easy. If I can make them, anyone can actually. Some people will say, well, my roux doesn't ever seem to really thicken, or it clumps up. There's a method to adding roux to any kind of liquid. And my rule of thumb is this. You can add a cold or a cool roux to a hot mixture, or you can add a hot roux to a cold mixture. And if you're adding roux to something cold, try to add it as quickly as possible. Don't just pour it in a little bit at a time, because You want to add it very quickly and keep it stirred up and then bring it up to a boil. So we're going to bring this to a boil, and then I'm going to add this roux in, and I can add as much or as little as I want. I don't like my gumbo really, really thick. One thing, I can always thicken it up if I want to, or I can thin it down if I need to add some more chicken broth to it. This is the moment we've all been waiting for. We have our stock, our Trinity. Oh, you know what I forgot to add a minute ago? I forgot to add the Holy Trinity, the garlic. I'm glad I just remembered that. So it's okay, we'll go ahead and add it in now. It's not gonna hurt anything at all. It may even make it a little better. You know, there's no real way to have to do that. This is good and hot, and you need it. It has to be hot in order for this to thicken. So I'm gonna start adding my, my beautiful roux to this, a little at a time. Here, it should thicken here in a bit. See the color that it's developing? I told you it not only adds viscosity, thickness here to it, it adds a lot of color and depth to it. Folks, I think so far we're doing really, really good here. If you do it a different way, please let me know in the comments. I'm always happy to hear all the comments and respond to everybody, because I do get a lot of really, really good ideas from people all over the country and actually all over the world. So it's kind of a fun thing to be able to do that. So see how it's thickened up a little bit? That's about the way I like it. I really don't like it really, really thick. I'm gonna go ahead and pour our chicken in there. Oh, don't do that. Woo! We're in chicken home, so yeah, I don't recommend that. That wasn't really a good thing to do. I should have used some gloves, but I was too lazy to go get some gloves, and I almost caused a disaster there. Here's something you need to know about making a really good gumbo. You not only have the roux, you have your Trinity, your vegetables, you have your good broth, you have your seasonings, which we've already seasoned things, and a couple things we can do if we want to. We can add a little bit of this Lee and Perrins, and I never can pronounce that, Worcestershire sauce, Worcestershire. So we're gonna add a little bit of that, not a lot. That's kind of a traditional thing. And over here I have a little bit of, I love Louisiana hot sauce. Absolutely love it. That or a little Tabasco. Add a little hot sauce to that. I'm not going to taste it now because I have raw chicken in there, by the way. And remember, I have my homemade seasoning. I have a link on my channel to on how to make seasonings like this. Bay leaves and thyme. How could I forget that over here? Let me put that in. It's not too late. An important element of making this gumbo is the simmer. What I call the simmer and the set. You can eat this gumbo right after the chicken cooks, but the longer you let it simmer, the more flavor is going to build up in it, and it's going to be much better. And I really like making it a day ahead of time, cooling it down, putting it in the refrigerator, because I think it gets better day after day. I just had some recently, and the third day, I mean, it was unbelievably good. So I'm going to cover this up. It's on a low simmer, and we're going to look back at it in about 2 or 3 hours. And while this is cooking, we're going to go ahead and make the next thing that I think is important for a good gumbo, and that is the rice. You've got to have, not potatoes, you've got to have rice for a good gumbo. So let me cover that up and we'll be right back. We're going to go ahead and put our rice in here. And I always like to take it over to the sink, turn some cold water on it, and run the water on it until all the starch is washed off of it. I think that makes a better rice. Again, let me know your thoughts on that, your theory on making rice. A lot of people make really good rice. I'm interested in hearing what you have to say. All right, I think that's pretty good. Got a pretty good little pot over here. Throw that in there. And this was full to the top with rice, and I've washed the rice. Now, I'm going to double that, 2-to-1 ratio. Already hot water, so that's okay. About 1/4 of a stick of butter and throw in there. I'm not adding any salt or anything because our gumbo has plenty of salt. Stir that around a bit. We're going to put that on the stove, bring it to a boil, and then bring it down to a simmer, leave the lid on it, and let it cook about 30-40 minutes. There you have it, the perfect pot of gumbo. I tell you, it was so easy, wasn't it? Oh, the roux was the hardest thing. Now, gumbo has to have two more things. It has to have the perfect garnish, and I think probably a little fresh parsley chopped on top, some green onions chopped and put on there, and then of course gumbo filet, and then if you want a little extra hot sauce, that's good as well. But then the ninth thing that you really have to have good gumbo, you need to have family and friends sitting around the table, telling a lot of stories, and enjoying the meal that you've cooked. Thank you for watching today. Be sure to like this channel, subscribe to it if you haven't already, tell all of your friends. Remember, I'm John Woods and this is All Things Food. Love to cook, but always cook to love. Enjoy.